public hearing of the City Council Committee on Labor and Civil Service. The purpose of this public hearing is to hear testimony on Bill number 160278. I recognize the presence of a quorum of committee members. Members of the committee in attendance are, to my left, Councilman Taubenberger, Councilwoman Sanchez, and Councilman Heenan. We also have several other council members. There's a concurring meeting taking place as we speak. So when you see other members of the committee come in, you know they are coming from another meeting that is currently being held. Let me just ask for the record, are there any comments or opening remarks that members of the committee would like to make at this time? There being none, the clerk will now read the title of the bill being considered today.
An ordinance amending Section 17-1305 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Compensation Required to be Paid to Employees to revise the compensation and benefits required to be provided in connection with the application of the Philadelphia 21st Century Minimum Wage Standard, all under certain terms and conditions.
Thank you. Let me just, from a background perspective, provide a brief summary for the benefit of the public. This bill adds one phrase to the 21st minimum wage ordinance, provided that the minimum wage shall not be less than the previous year's minimum wage. During the previous administration, an executive order was issued, and the terms of the living wage to include a CPI adjustment and a $12 floor. However, the executive order only applied to the first tier of subcontractors, and a former councilman, Wilson Good, now senior member of our technical staff, authored legislation to extend the living wage to all tiers of subs. Unfortunately, at the public hearing on this bill, there was a question asked pertaining to the living wage, and the question was simply, could the living wage ever go down if the CPI went down? And the answer that the council received was no. Unfortunately, as of January 2016, we found out that the answer to the question was actually yes, and the minimum wage went down to $11.94 due to a drop in the CPI. And so this legislation is to ensure that the minimum wage will never go down if the CPI goes down. With that being said, will the clerk call up the first witness to testify?
Richard Laser.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony?
Sure. Richard Laser, Deputy Mayor for Labor. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Parker and members of the committee. My name is Richard Laser and I'm Deputy Mayor for Labor. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify in support of Bill number 160278. I would like to begin by thanking the Chairwoman for authoring this bill. Bill number 160278 corrects a technical flaw in the language of Chapter 17-1300 of the Philadelphia Code, Philadelphia 21st Century Minimum Wage Standard, which, under a specific set of circumstances, can expose workers on contracts covered by this ordinance to a wage decrease. Currently, the minimum wage standard is annually adjusted based on changes in the Consumer Price Index, without accommodation for maintaining the living wage if the CPI goes down. This means a negative inflation rate could actually lower the minimum wage. Bill number 160278 adds new language to Chapter 17-1300, which provides that regardless of the annual CPI calculation, the minimum wage standard shall not be less than the previous year's minimum wage. This is just one example of Chairwoman Parker's leadership on issues of economic security, like, for example, Resolution 160105, which will shed light on the state of retirement security both in the public and private sectors in Philadelphia. The administration strongly supports Bill number 160278 and thanks the Chairwoman for her continued leadership on this matter. I would be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Laser. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? And I do have to state for the record that while Councilman Taubenberger and I are newer members of this body, both Councilwoman Sanchez along with Councilman Heenan, you all were here and present during this discussion, and I know echoed the sentiments of Councilman Wilson Good during that time. So any comments or anything you want to make for the record? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else here to testify on this bill? Hearing none, this concludes the public hearing, and thank you, Mr. Laser, again for your testimony and the administration. We appreciate your support of this very important legislation.
And thank you, Councilwoman.
This concludes the public hearing. We will now go into a public meeting to consider the action to be taken on the bill heard today. The public meeting and motions for Bill number 160-278. The chair recognizes, and we want to call our public meeting to order, and present Councilman Taubenberger's, members Heenan, along with Sanchez, and the chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez for a motion on Bill number 160-278.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that Bill 160-278 be moved out of this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading at our next council session.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded that Bill number 160-278 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. The motion carries. Bill number 160-278 will be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, with a request that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading at the next session of council. This concludes the business of the Committee on Labor and Civil Service for today. Thank you all so very much for your attendance.